All right, welcome back to the Autistic Tidbits and Tangents podcast. I'm Kara Diamond, one of your three hosts. I am an autistic teacher educator, author, nerd, all sorts of things from Toronto, Canada.
I am Maja Todale. I'm an autistic psychologist, speaker, author, things, mom.
Hi, I'm Bruce Cathartic. I'm an autistic musician and autistic advocate for Autism Canada. And like everybody else in this podcast, I'm a bit of a nerd as well.
That's why we get along so well, all three of us.
All right, so we were going to actually talk about consuming art because we already did an episode about creating art, like autistic art. Production, yeah. And while we were doing that, we realized we have to talk about the other side of it too. So we're going to do that now. Yay! Welcome to Autistic Tidbits and Tangents.
Candid conversations between autistic off-hour professionals.
With lots of tangents in different accents.
Cool. Trigger warnings for this episode include a few cursey words, talks of trauma, capitalism, and destruction of art. Yeah, I think we ended the last episode on this topic with Bruce really beginning to reflect on is there a specific way autistic people consume art or experience or interpret art? And we decided, oh my gosh, that has to be another topic. Any thoughts right off the bat from either of you on that?
I mean, my perspective is always really boring because I'm like, everyone is different.
Exactly. I agree with you. Bruce?
Okay. Well, yes, everything is, we are all unique. I think there are characteristics that we share as a community, which fundamentally change the way we consume art. So I think the most obvious is the idea that we have things called relaxed performances, sensory-friendly performances. Relaxed performances is the current term. And that is predicated on the fact that we have sensory issues as a community. Funnily enough, almost looking at hypersensitivity, not hyposensitivity, which is something I'm trying to fix. So there is that acknowledgement that theatre performances are often done with low level of light, with more space in the seating. The actors are often encouraged to be a little more articulate, which is a little unfair because almost every actor I've ever worked in is pretty articulate, and it's a creative decision why you do that. But anyway, so there is that. I think because these performances exist to help us with our disability, we have flipped that around as fundamentally we do consume art in a different way than neurotypical people. And this is a little of a difficult subject for me to start because primarily my entire life is on the creation of art. Because my entire life has been as a professional musician.
Yeah.
This is something I'm thinking all the time about how I produce and how I consume. So I think it'd be important for either of you two to start, and then I can, because I could speak about this for an hour and a half.
Well, I had a thought when you were talking about theater. So I am a lover of theater. My background is in theater. And I was just thinking about the difference between going to see a live show versus going to see a movie. And when I go to see a live show, I generally hate when actors use microphones. For some reason, I have more difficulty, like my auditory processing challenges when people use microphones. I don't know if it's because I can't get the directional sense. I don't know why. It was the same with university lecturers in big halls. I couldn't distinguish a lot of what they were saying when they use microphones. Interesting. Yeah, so that's an auditory processing thing. Movies these days, especially if you go to see, like, I don't know, Deadpool versus Wolverine, like any of those big movies, if they're so loud and they're so fast, like all these action scenes, that I can't process any of it. I just sort of shut down. I internally am like, I want to go to sleep the more action packed it is. That's my way of like withdrawing. That's just what I was thinking while you were talking.
Yeah. And I'm the opposite. I mean, I just went to see Deadpool and Wolverine and was like halfway cheering through the entire thing because it's nerds. I think so. I don't know if I'm bad at discussing this topic because I'm very strangely stereotypical in what art I like. And that's maybe I'm simplifying my own tastes in art when I say that. I don't know.
I guarantee you are.
I also don't think there's a stereotypical
I'm very average in many of my tastes. Like I started as a young teenager getting completely hooked on Michael Jackson, the Backstreet Boys, and Britney Spears. Yeah. Like that was my go-to music. I don't know if it was because my mother was playing Elton John and Madonna nonstop and I needed something different.
Yeah.
But I gravitate towards music I can dance to.
Fair.
I gravitate towards series and movies with heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because I want a hero, you know? Because I started watching series and movies at a time that I was being bullied a lot. And I wanted one of those heroes to show up for me. And I got stuck and I never left.
Yeah.
And look at me psychoanalyzing myself.
Just think about this for a second. Think about how lucky you are to live in the period that you live. So that's really touching about your connection to superheroes. I don't have any connection to superheroes, which is kind of, interesting. But it's like that's
no, but it doesn't have to be superheroes. It just had to be heroes. Yeah. So I started off. I'm going to give you an example. When I was a young kid, I started off watching Silverfang, the anime.
Oh wow!
Which is an anime about a group of dogs that are traveling around picking up more fighting dogs, and they are going to hunt a really big evil bear. Like, that's the entire thing. And it is really gruesome and really bloody and really violent. And for some reason, 7, 8, 9-year-old me was like, go Silverfang! Like, this really badass little dog that was just gonna go and fight his enemy and survive, and yay! And like, that was my hero. Then it was Robin Hood, you know? And I got stuck in that because imagine being a hero, or imagine knowing a hero like that, knowing someone like that, having someone like that around. How cool.
Yeah.
And I never left because it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
My point on that, though, is that, like, if you were my age, there were no hero movies. There were no hero television shows. Like in the 60s, like if you think about, there was no Superman. Superman was a television show in the 50s and then picked up again in the late 70s with the first Superman movie. Batman was camp as anything. We didn't have, like, I have a love of Astro Boy.
I've seen Astro Boy.
Yeah, I've seen the original because Australia does these weird things. So like there weren't, like in my childhood and teenage years, there weren't heroes. So if you needed to see the hero in the media, you probably didn't have a chance to do that. And the other point about your Michael Jackson, et cetera, is that that music is very specific to that time period and that specific dance that you're probably into. And like if you were looking for that again in the 60s, it's the Beatles or 50s rock and roll, which is not the same thing.
Not the same thing at all, but I think there's still a connection to like experiencing what it is like to move your body joyfully to a rhythm, which is all it is. Like dance and music to me is like an endorphin injection.
Yeah, as it should be. Yeah.
It's just an immediate connection to everything that feels good in this world. Which is also why if I didn't have a kid, I would probably get stuck listening to music the way I always have for hours and hours and hours and hours on end and get absolutely nothing productive done. Because once I'm in that mode of experiencing music, I don't want to leave.
Wow.
How autistic of you.
Yes. I have a couple of thoughts because I was just thinking about what sort of shows did I like as a child. And I think I liked shows similar to you. I mean, I loved Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves for sure. Injustice sensitivity. Yeah. Injustice sensitivity is really big in me. I hate when sort of the underdog, the lead, isn't listened to. Mr. Gadget, I hate it because he was always taking credit for things that Penny and the Brain solved. No one listened to the child. They overlooked them. It enraged me as a child watching that. My comfort film when I was sick, I watched the BBC Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, like from, I don't know if it was like the late 70s or early 80s. Very old. With the big giant, very obviously not real beavers and other animals in Narnia. But I loved watching that. And again, no one listened to Lucy. No one listened to Lucy when she's like, there's a wardrobe and I went to this other place. And they all were so dismissive of her. She's like, it's not a hoax. So I think those were pretty big themes in the kind of viewing I enjoyed.
Which makes sense because...
And the Lorax, although that was older,
but for you, being a very smart child and probably not being listened to as much as you should have been.
This is like a therapy session right now, isn't it?
Seeing characters that you identified with in that sense, that would have triggered exactly that sense of injustice in you. And it makes sense why you would gravitate towards that.
Yeah.
So how does it change when you grow up?
I don't know that it does. I just watched the first 2 seasons of Lupin, a French show about a gentleman burglar. And I can't say anything because it'll spoil it, but there was one particular thing they didn't wrap up in season 1 or season 2 where he had information about someone who was evil and tried to reveal it, and it never got revealed. And I'm like, that needs to be revealed. I'm still upset about it.
Well, I can't watch shows that are all gray areas. Yeah. And it's funny because my husband really loves shows like that where
ambiguity.
Yeah, there's no one for you to really root for. Like, they're all a little bit evil.
Mm-hmm.
He loves that. The moral gray areas is his comfort zone. And I'm like, no, I need that person that I can root for. I can't even give specifics right now, but it's so hard for me to watch movies or TV shows that don't have a good guy. And it's weird because it doesn't have to be a completely clean-cut good guy. I'm fine with someone like Dexter, you know?
Yeah. Okay, I'm sending
totally
you.
Fine with that.
You have to watch The Glory, which is a Korean series about a woman getting revenge on high school bullies. It's very gory though. Like, there are things that are really hard to watch from her flashbacks, but it's very good.
This is interesting. This is interesting for me because I don't have connection with television and movies.
No, for you, it's music.
Well, and quite honestly, like, for about 20 years, I didn't watch movies because it was work. And I meant that fact because I was actually doing film composition. It was like I was criticizing in my head, what would I do better, what was right, what was good, and missing that. But when I'm thinking of the films I really like, but that's Feast, funnily enough, for a nice Danish story. And Jean de Florette and Manon de Sauce, the two French. And it's like, I'm not too sure there's any heroes. I don't know if there's good or evil. I don't know. I'm not thinking in those terms at all. Yeah. And this is fascinating. Sort of, I don't have this connection.
I mean, I also loved like Jojo Rabbit. I just found it a really interesting, I mean, again, a child as a hero, sort of anti-hero too, but they make Nazis look ridiculous, which I enjoy very much. And it's super
never
creative.
Anything wrong with that.
There's like whimsy, there's imagination. It's like excessively creative, and it's not like you don't expect most of it. You know, it's just very surprising, and I enjoy things that surprise me a little bit.
Does this feed into any of our presentations?
Maybe. Well, I mean, I already said like my traumas not being listened to.
Okay. So here's another part of autistic consumption of art that I think this is actually an autistic thing, is our joy at consuming the same art over and over and over and over again. Now, I already said like the kind of music that I really started with being interested in, and of course my collection is a lot broader now. I'm not going to say that I have, 25 plus gigabytes of music on my phone at all times, but I've had that for a long time. And then I have my collection of CDs, of course. There's some overlap, but not all. Here's the thing, though. There are a lot of songs that I have listened to 500 plus times. And some of it is because I like to play the same album of classical music when I write. When I do any sort of academic or professional writing, I tend to need classical music to help me stay focused. But it's not just that. It's a bunch of others too that are like, I don't know how many times I've heard these songs, but too damn many.
Yeah.
And I also sometimes, when I listen to a song that I haven't heard for maybe 10 years, I don't just remember the lyrics. I remember the ad-libs. I remember the harmonies.
Yeah.
I remember every single beat.
Sound.
Yeah. And I think I'm the only person that has ever gotten, well, no, that's
generalization.
No, I'm the only person I know that when I listen to Whitney Houston's version of I Will Always Love You, there's one note that is pitchy. Tiny bit. It ruins it. I get right back into it after that, but it's like one note just takes me out of it.
Every time.
I love her as a singer. But she was so pitch perfect that one note stands out to me, and nobody
jarring. Else. Yeah. Yeah. I once had an accompanist say that my ear was really, really spot on, because one time I didn't come in, and I looked at him and I was like, did you do something different? And he said, like, I played one note different in that chord, one note different, but it threw me because I was used to a certain,
it was different
exact sound.
Yeah.
And I was like, what was that?
It has to be that particular rendition of the song. Like, for me, there's a huge difference between a studio recording and a live recording of a song. It's the same song. And I know people that don't hear the difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also know people that can't tell. There's a lot of people that can't tell if someone is lip syncing or not. But to me, the track of the studio recording of the voice, it's stored
in your brain.
I'm listening to it right now.
Yeah.
So you can be playing live instruments all you want.
But it's the same track. Interesting.
I'm just sitting here smiling. One, Cara, you may not want to play with me. I'm better
now. That was like when I was 13. Now I'm more flexible.
Because funnily enough, I've had singers say exactly the same thing to me.
I sing jazz now. I'm good. Good with improv.
I'm going to say something catty. There's only one note in that Whitney Houston performance. I can think of three straight away. Anyway, and so here's the interesting thing. When this talks about the consumption. I know a performance is live by instantaneously hearing the difference, not remembering, but I know it from the point that it's happening. So I'm processing it in the moment, where you're doing a comparison, coming up with the same answer.
Interesting. My big thing with live, I hate autotune. I hate when I can hear the autotune. To
me, there's a difference between if it's a stylistic choice.
Yeah, if it's like a hip hop song and they use it as a convention that comes up and up, and it's meant to be that way.
Pitch correction is everywhere.
I hate it. I hate the tinniness.
Live.
I know. It drives me up the wall, and I'm like, I wish that we just had. I mean, all singers can be pitchy sometimes. Whitney being a great example, beautiful singer. But it would be great if we had singers who could sing instead of who just looked good, and we auto-tuned everything that they do.
But I like the ones that look good too.
Well, and you're big into K-pop.
I'm too much into K-pop. No, but so my fascination with K-pop is from a different
performative aspect, right? Like you like
so for me the thing that caught me about K-pop was how perfect it all is. Like comparing, so I grew up with the Backstreet Boys, I grew up with Britney Spears, I grew up with
Spice Girls,
and kind of the Western standard of how to do a music group and how to do a dance performance and how to do a music video. I grew up with that, and I consumed a lot of it growing up. And I was also in the modeling industry for a short number of years. Not that I loved it. We've talked about that, I think. But then, seeing K-pop, it's like the production value.
Yes.
And I started being into K-pop back in like 2008. So it's a long time. I'm old. But like, even then, no, but like watching the difference, even then, it's crazy now, but watching the difference in 2008 between a K-pop music video or a K-pop performance and a Western music video or performance, crazy. Like the level of detail was obscene to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the knowing how much work would have gone into producing the music to sound that way, rehearsing the dance to be so synchronized, and being able to do it on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was like, I'm not ignoring the horrible work conditions that these people live under. I'm not. They are effectively slaves. And morally, I kind of think the K-pop industry is bankrupt. There's a lot of stuff to go into on that side of things. But on the side of looking at the product that they create, there's a reason it's so catchy. There's a reason it's so impressive, because the work that's gone into it and the attention to detail that's been put into it is off the charts consistently.
Yeah. Two points in this. One, there is a completely different aesthetic in looking at music performance now. And I think it's very much been influenced, especially now, by K-pop. But of course, K-pop was influenced with what Madonna was doing in the 80s, but just took it in a very specific way. And so, and it's also we're not talking about music anymore. And I'm not being precious about this, but it's like,
we're not talking about, the K-pop industry is not music.
No,
like,
and Taylor Swift's not music.
Attractive about it isn't music, I think.
Yeah.
Would you classify it as theater?
And theater is moving, like musical theater. Mm-hmm. In the 40 years I was active in musical theater, changed from this to this, much more Disney. You like music theater, you can't do a music theater performance now without spectacular. It has to be spectacular. It has to be loud. It has to be continuous. It has to have everybody has to be a super triple threat.
Yeah.
Rather than more organic, perhaps. I don't want to say that sense. And you can't be a three-piece singer-songwriter trio now without a show.
Mm-hmm. No. So what would I compare K-pop to? I would probably say it's closer to like an art version of a military parade.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like it's showing off, this is what we can do in this country. Mm-hmm. This is what our hard work produces.
Yeah. This
is how clean we can make it look.
Yeah.
This is how good we can make it sound. This is the standard. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like a very long-term planned cultural invasion. And I kind of love it for that. It's very well thought out, but it's a money machine at the same time. And the human side of it is very hard for me to ignore. So I don't think I look at K-pop as art. I look at it as using art as a medium for a larger cultural movement. But then comparing it to like the opposite, or I don't know if it's the opposite side of my taste, but like then listening to someone like Haley Reinhart.
Oh, incredible singer.
Her, you know, that's expression, but she's playing. Like she's messing around with whatever she's doing. It feels
every time it's different. Yeah.
Yeah. She's just living her best life every time she sings a song. I get the sense of her being like, what can I do with this right now?
To make it fun, spontaneous. Yeah. How am I feeling it? Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to be bored singing the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I listen to her, I'm perfectly fine with each performance being different because it's a part of it.
Yeah.
How much is that oh boy. Okay. How much of that is your horizon of expectation?
Oh, good question.
Completely. Completely. Like when I listen to a certain type of music, I expect it to either be consistent or not.
Which is also, you're still standardizing the second, right? That's your expectation is now this is a form that allows play, that allows variability, and that is the rule.
That's what jazz is to me.
And I love jazz.
But still, I will say that jazz is a difficult genre for me.
Okay.
So here's where my ignorance comes up, because I don't know what each style is called, but I'm very attracted to the style of jazz that is still within the confines of, I know when there's going to be a verse and a chorus. They play around with that, with the form that it takes. But I can still sort of, like, I know what the song is.
It's still predictable.
It's still somewhat predictable. Whereas a like jazz jamming session, my brain goes like, no. It's too much. It's too much. It's complete sensory overload, which is the same way, oddly, that I feel about orchestra performances.
Wow.
I love classical music, but I love simple classical music. I love a piano and a violin, maybe a cello. Give me an orchestra and I'm like like my brain blows up. I can't.
Okay. I'm sorry, Cara, do you have a point on that?
I'd love you to jump in. That's fine.
Okay. I really want to dig into that one.
Thank you.
And it's kind of interesting from a classical musician's perspective, and I'll put that hat on for a second. The orchestra is more precise than the small ensemble.
Yeah.
Funnily enough.
Yeah.
So what is it about the orchestra? Is it there's just too much sound? There's too many people?
There's too many individual things happening all at the same time.
It's like, I'd like to. I was going to use one of my wife's favorite phrases, challenge you on that, and it's more like no, but it's more like,
you could probably find orchestra performances that don't overwhelm me.
Yeah,
would love,
and then hopefully I could find a string trio, which is violin, cello, and piano, that would send you nuts because so much stuff is going on.
Probably.
Without, I don't want to overwhelm you, but yeah, that's an interesting. That's kind of interesting. It's so. Cara mentioned this before. Like, I haven't been to, the last movie I saw in a theater was it's a Lego movie. Django, something like that. Anyway, and it was because our kids wanted to go to the movie theater. I was like, oh, great. Okay. Movie theaters are way too loud. Have been way too loud for 20 years. They're just stupid now. So I cannot go to a movie theater. I have seen one professional theater performance in my life. And that was on Broadway, with an exit strategy. And they were very helpful. The staff and allowing me, this is your exit strategy if you need to leave, and we'll let you back in. I have performed. So I did Les Mis for 3 years. I've done like 1,000 performances of Les Mis. So in the pit, or if it's a show that I'm music directing or associate music directing where I know what is happening, I'm completely fine. Something that is, even though it's a Stephen Sondheim, something I know backwards, I can't go through that because it's just too sensory overwhelming. And it's not the performance, it's what's going on around.
Yeah.
So it's sort of interesting, Maya. I think it's not what the orchestra is doing, is that there's so many of them and you're in the theater and there's so many people and there's that added, your sensitivities are up, are heightened anyway.
Yeah, but even if it's a recording.
Oh.
Even if it's a recording. Here's the weird thing. I love going to concerts.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I've been, until my feet broke, I would always do standing tickets. Now I have to buy seats because my feet will not allow me to stand up for that length of time. But I've been to everything from Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. And the first concert I went to actually was a Backstreet Boys concert. And it was really good. And I would have been younger than 12 because it was before we moved. Loved it. Bunch of pop concerts. Also been to stuff like Sarah Brightman and Elton John and things like that. I've been to a Muse concert. Loved it. And for some reason, regardless of whether I'm in the crowd or in a seat, concert experiences are just good. There's almost nothing that can happen at a concert that will make it not good, except if the performance sucks. And I've never had that. Like, that's never happened. I've never been to a bad concert. Actually, probably the worst one that I've been to was the first Britney concert that I went to, but that was also the venue.
So what's your sensory profile?
I don't know. I've never actually tested my sensory profile. I've never delved into trying to describe it. I think
you're one of the first autistics I've ever met that couldn't answer that question off, like, oh, it's this. That's fascinating.
No, but okay, here's the thing. I am very visually inclined. I'm also very auditorily inclined. Like, both of those are like way up there. I also have a strong connection to language, probably more so to the sound of language than necessarily to the meaning. But I love reading good writing. I can't write the way I want to write. Like, I can't write the way I want to read things, but I love good language. The thing that's probably difficult for me, which I think, Kara, you mentioned this as well, is like art that is so non-direct in its meaning, where you have to like dig for the metaphor, that I find hard.
I wanted to talk about
also,
poetry.
One of the paintings that I have on my wall, which is by an autistic artist, there's probably a huge, deep meaning to it. To me, it's some pretty blue swirls on a canvas. And I love it. I love looking at it. It's so soothing. It's so calming, but I'm not looking for meaning. I can't. I can't, because it's too non-direct. But I'm fine with most metaphors in language.
Because the metaphors are accessible because you understand them. Whereas poets, like, we play with language and it sometimes has a very obscured meaning that is relevant only to the writer. Not always. Like, you can study these, you can try and figure it out. I think I have definitely met many autistic people who don't find poetry accessible because of, the figurative aspects, and depending on the poem, there are some I really hate or don't find resonate with me because I maybe don't understand those aspects, and I prefer poetry that is a bit more direct. But I love to write poetry. I love to play with those conventions myself. But again, I see it as a very individual thing. If someone else enjoys it, great. But it is more about me exploring my thoughts, my relationship with these concepts. I've always written poetry, and I started moving away from like rhyming form, like the stuff that sort of makes a bit more sense when I was in high school. And it really became more about, I saw this article on, a war going on, or I kept a scrapbook on articles on the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. And I started to write poetry about the complexity of thought I was having about those topics. So for me, it slows down my processing when I have to write poetry. So instead of being like many thoughts at once, as a consumer, again, not all of it I enjoy, because sometimes it's just like, well, what does that even mean anyways? I hated Robert Frost's Birches, I think it's called. But I love things like Mary Oliver's poetry.
Don't you also like T.S. Eliot?
T.S. Eliot. So not at first, I didn't. When I first read The Wasteland, I was like, what the fuck is this? There's my swear word for today. But
it wasn't me this time.
I had a course in it. I really, it went sort of like, if you read things in context, if you know what makes things interesting, both visual art, like if I'm at an art gallery, or like poetry like that, when I have an understanding of the author's intention, the historical context, just post-war, grappling with the sort of is the word nihilism? Nihilism. The total devastation of like, wow, this is what humanity can do to one another. Once I have that sort of historical knowledge, it becomes interesting to me.
Kind of parallel to that. I remember in school having to read a part, at least, of Pride and Prejudice.
Okay.
And at the time, I don't know what the bleep my teacher was thinking. It wasn't me today.
You censored yourself.
But it was pitched to us as a love story at the time. Boring. Okay. As an adult, I find out that no, you're actually not supposed to read Pride and Prejudice as a love story. It's actually more of a kind of humorous, satirical jab at the upper class.
Commentary on social norms.
So I read it again as an adult. now I love it because now I understand the context in which to read it. Now I'm trying to find something that isn't there.
Yeah.
You know?
So here is I'm going to go into the producer's mode for a second here. The last 100 years, we've had a complete shift in consumption of art, from art being produced for I'm going to say a really horrible thing, a generally educated audience, and educated in a very specific way. So Pride and Prejudice, anybody reading that in the 1920s and 30s in England would recognize the satire.
Or in the
it's like
1820s.
Well, but it's like taking that anyway. You cannot understand The Wasteland at all without being able to read Greek, without being able to read Latin, without knowing Shakespeare backwards, without knowing world history. And the current writers, there's a couple parodies in the middle of it. The Shakespearean Rag is a parody of 1920s music hall songs, 1910s music hall songs. It's because T.S. Eliot was living in an area that the people who are going to consume that content knew most of the references.
They had those kinds of knowledge, yeah.
Yep. You were supposed to work at it. You were supposed to work at poetry.
Yeah. We
don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
No.
And
art is supposed to be easy today.
Well, yes, and I think this is where when you're talking about this art that you don't get because you have to work at it. I mean, if you go back to K-pop, you don't as a producer, a consumer, I apologize, need to work at the consumption of the K-pop. You are appreciating a lot of the elements of it. You can probably and dissect it at a high degree, but you're not.
Oh, absolutely.
You're not having to work at the consumption, and it's annoying for me as the music I produce. You have to work at it, or I'm actually playing with conventions. I'm leading you down a path and then stopping, and I want you to wait until I continue. And people get really frustrated like that, and I was like, well, it's because you want the instant gratification, and that's a very specific thing for me. And I honestly think that's part of my autistic representation, is that allowing infinite possibilities and not expecting it to go in a particular direction, and allowing it to just appear in a way, because everything's a surprise. Every environment
everything's unpredictable.
Everything is a surprise. So that's the way I like to produce my music.
Yeah, but I think that's from, obviously you can have that that mindset as a consumer as well, but I think it's easier to have that mindset as a producer. So when I write stories, when I write fiction, I don't know what's going to happen. Now I'm not writing for anyone in particular to read it, but the characters I create, I don't necessarily know what they're going to do.
Likewise. And there's just what is true. What is true.
Yeah, they just do it. And I'm like, this was not what I intended, but fine.
And I hate when you can see the intention of the author, right? When it feels like you're imposing something. I don't know.
Yeah. And I do the same. I think actually I learned to do that a lot from tabletop role playing, because in that setting, there's a storyteller and there's a general plot, but the group is going to do what the group is going to do.
Yeah.
And you can't control that.
Yeah.
And things are just going to happen. And I think when you are creating something, and you know that you are creating something rather than just being in the chaos that is the world, you can allow for that freedom. But a lot of the time when I'm consuming art, I do it because I'm looking for a specific experience. I'm looking for the music or the movie or whatever it is to trigger something or to help me through a particular experience. I'm looking for experiencing a particular mood, or going through an emotion, going through an experience. And if I then get something completely different from what I was looking for, or if I don't know what I'm going to get, I have to be in a mindset to be open to that new experience. This happens very often with television series. If I can't just start a new show on any day. There are some days where I have the capacity to experience something new. And then there are all the other days where I want to know what I'm going to experience-ish. Like I can watch, okay, so I love shows like Castle and, like silly cop shows.
And it has a predictable structure and you kind of know what to expect.
Predictable structure, you know the characters, you know the setting. I can experience a new story within that setting without going too far out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
But opening a door to an entirely new setting that I don't know anything about, I need the capacity to do that in order to do it. And if I don't have that capacity, I would rather rewatch Gilmore Girls for the 18th time, because that's what my capacity will allow me to do right now.
For sure. I relate.
And I think it's the same thing with like music and even with visual art. Like if I know what I'm going into, I don't need as much mental capacity. If I'm cognitively overloaded, which I am a lot of the time, I don't have that extra energy to process a new experience. Which is why I go back and listen to the same thing over and over and over again.
I think that's a common reason why we do have these comfort music television shows. That
I think it also just applies to what you said earlier with like art is produced for an entirely different audience today. It has to be way more easily accessible. And I think, honestly, this is not to do with autism in any specific sort of way, but it's adjacent. I think people are cognitively overloaded today compared to 50, 70 years ago. We live in a world where we have to process so much information all the time. And I think people are constantly a little bit overloaded. And that's why we need art to be easy. That's why we need to have the stories served to us on a silver platter. We don't have the capacity to do the guesswork to figure out, oh, who did the thing? No, you have to tell me. Because I can't think.
I mean, I like things that,
of course,
I agree to some extent, and there's certainly days where it's like I want things that are easy, but I do like art that makes me think, whether it's poetry, visual art, shows, things like that. But I have my limits with visual art. Like I mentioned to you both before this, like again, if I know the historical context of things, it's more interesting to me, but I really hate thinking about the monetary value of art. I hate when there's like a stripe on a canvas that is like millions of dollars, valued at millions of dollars. And it's like, it's a stripe in the canvas. I, with my fine motor issues, could do this, I don't like when it's like a toilet in the middle of the gallery floor, to me, I don't relate to that type of art. Even art where I understand the intention, I understand the politics, like I find some of the things done by Ai Weiwei very interesting, but when he broke the Han dynasty vase, that was again worth millions of dollars, which I don't think anything should. For me, the value is in the history when he broke it, even though it was a commentary on like communism and he broke something. And to me, I'm very precious about things. And so like things like that, I have significant trouble wrapping my head around. But I like art where I'm looking at it and there's something in it that speaks to me. I used to work at the Art Gallery of Ontario for a very long time, and a couple of stories from there. I once had a guest who came to the gallery, came and spoke to me at the desk that I was working at and said, like, there has to be a way, there has to be a system to quantify what is good art. They were probably autistic in retrospect. I was like, I don't think there is, because I speak to so many people, and some people loved that exhibition that you hated, and it really is such a personal response to different forms of art. Yeah. One time, one of my young students came to visit the gallery, like just on a weekend, and I was working on weekends at the gallery, and I took him to see a specific room in the Art Gallery of Ontario. And on one side of the wall, like it's this really huge, high ceiling room, one side, it's done in, what's the name of the style? It's just multiple paintings all clustered together like it was in someone's,
collage
manor house, where they're just displaying vast wealth, like tons of paintings all together. And on the other side of the room, I think there was only like 3 paintings, and they were Impressionist paintings, because Impressionists changed how they displayed artwork, and obviously was quite a significant departure from sort of the realism, romanticism of art, where it should look like what it's meant to look like and be really easy to consume. And I related it to neurodivergence, like thinking can change. People can come along and drastically change how we approach and think about things. And you can visually see it in this gallery. Anyway, that's, to me, I really enjoy Impressionism. I enjoy things that are relatable. I can figure out what they're about, but they are still, I don't know, there's still so much room for me as a viewer to add a layer of interpretation of story. And the longer I look at it, the more I notice.
So tell us about your immersive art experience in Toronto with the.
Oh God,
I can't remember I can't even remember who the painter was.
Van Gogh, wasn't it Van Gogh? Bruce and I went to the Van Gogh. Not like an art exhibition. It's one of those exhibitions that had projections and music, and so you're not actually seeing the real artwork in front of you. You're seeing a projection on a white wall. And they move and they change and they animate portions of it. And like, okay, it was cool for like a minute, but it was crowded. It would, like, you couldn't go at your own pace. You were kind of shuffled through to the next room. It was too loud. The music didn't,
it wasn't using music of the period. It was directing the gaze. That was the thing that I hated.
Yeah, telling you how to consume it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And mostly people-y. I don't like things when they're people-y.
And then we also, like, you and I went to the Art Gallery of Ontario, and it was Andy Warhol, wasn't it?
Did we? Yes.
Yeah, But you and I gave up because it was just too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it, I understand. And the repetition, it's interesting, but not that interesting to me. Again, it's a certain message that artist is trying to convey that just doesn't resonate with me.
So Maya has to leave in 5 minutes, so we should.
Yeah, I obviously our time zone differences mean that we record at strange times of day, and I have to get back home to my baby before she has to go to bed.
I have to have breakfast.
I have to have, brunch. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess we should wrap it up there. I'd love to hear from some of our listeners or viewers your thoughts on how you consume art and in all forms, and what resonated, what was different for you than for the three of us.
I think this is really an interesting topic, and it's going to be very interesting as well, because next year I'm on the scientific committee for the Autism Europe Congress next year, and I don't think this usually happens, but we have slots set aside for creative performances in the program. And I think it's going to be really interesting how that resonates at a large conference. Large conference for Europe and for this field. It's like 3,000 people.
That's still large.
Yeah, but there are.
So this is it's not plastic art. It's actually performative.
Yeah.
So this is the first time I've heard of this.
We don't know yet who it will be or what it will be, but there are slots set aside for a room being. We would love to have you. Definitely, send in an application.
That would be so cool.
That would be really cool. But yeah, there's a room set aside at certain time slots for creative performances.
I'm glad you said it. Like suddenly, there is so many. I am thinking so much about creating autistic art,
mm-hmm.
And I would so love to engage in a conference like that.
I just think it's going to be really interesting, because conferences are usually so, clinical and academic, and, it's very language and knowledge, and kind of neglecting, I guess the human side of it. And we're so focused on having autistic participation for this Congress. And so a couple of the others on the committee brought up the idea to have art as a part of the conference. And seeing how that's going to resonate with people, professionals, parents, and autistic people, who are all going to be in attendance. That's going to be really interesting.
I have to
share. We should do a survey.
Yeah.
How each group kind of processes.
Yeah.
I have to share the first 3 conferences I went to as an academic musician. One was computer music, and the other 2 were musicology. Had no live music except for the evening. Yep. And this is a problem. This was a problem very much 80s and 90s musicology. It was a whole bunch of academics writing about music, but no one was performing. And I was a little weird, because I came as a performer as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, it's changed now. But when you said that, it's like even at music conferences, there wasn't performances. Mm-hmm. There weren't performances.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, do you want to do the thing of the day quickly?
Okay, so the thing of the day, and literally this arrived at, so I got up at 7. It was at my doorstep before 7 in the morning. So thank you to that horrible multinational company that brings things to us at this time. It's a book by Robert Chapman called Empire of Normality, and it's all about neurodiversity and capitalism. And I think this is like germane to what we've been talking about. Well, the one thing we haven't talked about is how art has always been capitalistic, but is so now a capitalistic mm-hmm. production. And it's kind of I'm looking forward to going through this and looking at, even ownership of the means of production and how that's different mm-hmm. for us, because we are so outside.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And also recognizing that autistic people as a group are likely to have less funds to access art.
Mm-hmm.
That is, yikes. A whole other topic.
Yes, we keep getting to like these points.
How does neurodiversity fit into a system of capitalism?
Well, once you're done the book, Bruce, I love Robert Chapman's work.
We expect a presentation.
Yeah, we'll do a whole episode on it.
He talks about it needs a revolution.
Yeah.
I think I know where this is going.
Well, one last thought, because I sort of got to capitalism in art because I don't like how much things can be worth, and the Ai Weiwei destroying something. More, the problem for me was not how much it costs, but the historical thing. Whereas when Banksy burned Banksy's own painting, I was like, that's fine. You can destroy your own work. Like, that's up to you.
Yeah, of course. You made it. You get to do whatever you want with it.
Yeah. Interesting. Is this a part 3? Are we getting into a part 3? We'll see.
I think we are. I think it's, we're all so enmeshed in art, in the creation and the consumption of it. And also because all 3 of us are academics on top of that. I just think we are used to approaching topics from a variety of directions. Yes.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. There's one point I was going to make before, just again to wrap. Maya, you talked about cognitive overload.
Mm-hmm.
I am wondering whether that's actually a advantage we have, that we are aware that we become cognitive overload and we are aware we need to stop.
Yeah.
We are aware we need, I can't remember which of the two of you, a dumb cop show. Which bores me senseless in all sense, but that's fine, which again, we're showing differences. But all of us have talked about being aware of when the overload and escaping, where I think neurotypical people don't.
I would challenge that though, because with like alexithymia, having difficulty feeling things in your own body, like there have been times I have not been aware that I'm overstimulated, and it's only like being really grouchy, like things like that are the tell. So not all of us are aware all the time, and our awareness can fluctuate as well.
And I think it also comes like with the diagnosis. So
true,
being neurodivergent isn't the key here. It's being aware. Of your own neurodivergence and your profile, and not necessarily your sensory profile, but your neurodivergent profile, all aspects of that, and having built that sense of self-awareness. And some of it might come with maturity, but some of it doesn't. Some of it comes from actively exploring who you are.
Yes.
And
working at it.
If you've done that, it's definitely a benefit. I would agree with that. But a lot of neurodivergent people that I have met, some of them diagnosed, some of them not, are so adverse to exploring themselves.
Isn't this what we talk about, though? Isn't this like one of the fundamental things of why we do this, of the encouragement that it's important? Yes, it's difficult. Yes, I call it a roller coaster. There's ups and downs, but it's really important that we work on our differences. Sorry, now passionate.
No, I agree. And I think personally, I don't see any negatives coming out of self-exploration. I think the only thing that could come out of it is something good if you have patience with it, if you're not steamrolled through it,
I mean, I think there's a certain grief and like becoming more aware of traumas that can be really difficult. But
of course it's difficult, but
working through that.
But yeah, I mean, a part of it is exactly working through that, because you carry that grief whether you're aware of it or not.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a part of how we explore the world and how we exist in the world is we use the strategies that we have to cope with the trauma and the grief that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And the more aware of it we are, the more we can work through it and do it in a conscious way.
Yes.
Seek the art that we need at that moment,
mm-hmm.
consciously, rather than gravitating towards it just because. And then it becomes a conscious effort to exist in a more comfortable way.
Yeah.
I think this is our next podcast, because I'm thinking that, one, Maja told us 20 something minutes ago she has 5 minutes.
Yes.
Two, it's like the three of us, our day jobs is encouraging people to go through this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And wonderfully from three kind of distinct different ways of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd love to keep talking about this because there's so much I want to talk about, and especially I haven't talked to Maja about this before. I think this would be super topic for another podcast. But also, Maja has to be a parent now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very specifically a mother. The important one.
Oh, the hardest job in the world.
It truly is. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Well, thanks so much to both of you, to all of the people listening as well. And we'll have another conversation that was inspired by this conversation. And I can't wait for the next one.
Cool.
Cool.
Oh, yuck.
Autistic.